Okay, we're back with another episode of Tecman Talks Dynamics, full house. I think Matt and Liz did last month. I sat and listened to it while I was walking the dog a few weeks when we came back off holiday, so that was good. And it's a little bit of a follow-on because last time you were talking about...
We were talking about upgrading, but
re-implementation,
getting onto the latest version on SaaS.
Okay, so you went through a whole bunch of reasons why being on that version of the SaaS platform is beneficial.
Yep.
And I know we've talked about this many times in events. So today we thought we'd take that another stage and some of the objections we get when we're talking to customers around coming off the on-premise version of BC or NAV and getting onto SaaS and some of the objections we have. But we also think some of the benefits that why it makes such a big difference. We're not just talking about the functionality here. I think in the current climate, we're seeing a lot of stuff in the news and the media around security.
I've been trying to place an order with Marks and Spencer's for 2 weeks,
okay.
And I still can't. So that's obviously very...
in the UK there's been a whole bunch of big organisations that have been attacked with cyber attacks.
Fresh food in the co-op by me.
For retail, that amount of time is catastrophic.
Two of the kind of arguably big 8 grocery retailers have had major shop outages because of systems down and causing utter chaos, and weeks later they're still not back up. They've still not got stuff on the shelf because their reordering systems aren't working, etc.
So
it's
but it doesn't
catastrophic.
just happen to big high street
we've got experiences.
We've got several customers with on-premise systems, companies that you wouldn't have heard of necessarily, that are usually part of that supply chain, that have been targeted and have lost whole databases of data.
Yeah.
And it's only when that happens that you realise that your backup functions are not good enough. And I think that's something that if you still have an on-premise solution now, you need to be very sure that you are resilient if you are attacked, because it doesn't just happen to Marks and Spencer's co-op and big large organisations. It actually happens a lot to smaller organisations where for these guys, it's easier to get into probably. 2, they might they might try and get less on the ransomware attack, but actually that's because it's an amount that they think they can get. And it's not as public, but it does happen. It's happening a lot, and it's happened to some of our customers recently, still on on-premise solutions.
So obviously when you move to SaaS, that's a whole package platform where Microsoft provide not just the Business Central or the Dynamics 365 CE solution, but they provide the availability, they provide a lot of the security, they provide you backup solutions, and so you get a lot more for your per user per month cost than just here's a bunch of functionality to run your business on.
And all you typically need in your business then is an internet connection and some printers.
Yeah.
If you, I know you don't like printing anything, but if you're printing labels or something,
you've got to print stuff out, haven't you still? Yeah. Okay, so let's go back. So if you're running on premise now, we've just talked about some of the potential threats that are out there. Security constantly is changing. The threat outlook we know some of the stuff we have to do.
And it's the time scale, Liam, because what you typically see in ransomware is your system is cracked in some way and you have no clue. So the model of operation that they seem to use is that they crack your system. Now that can be they crack somebody's password or whatever.
Someone clicks a link.
Clicks a link is a classic way in, and they're in, and they're almost dormant for a long period of time. Okay, and so that means that I'll restore our systems to 3 weeks before. Doesn't work because it was there. The problem was there 3 weeks before, and will come back to life. So you spend a whole bunch of work restoring all the systems. And the following day, they're back to square one because
it's got in again.
The virus, the kind of implant of what they
and that's on the assumption that your backup is work. Because people look at their backups and say, successful. Not many organisations, especially with the SME sector, will really do a true restore on a very regular basis to make sure they have
the whole system. It's
Absolutely.
not it's not one piece or another. It's kind of all the security setup and the whole kind of. Because they're very. I mean, I've seen some attacks here at Tecman, and clever little so and so's. I want to use a different word, but we're public, so I'll be polite. But they are very clever, very devious. Coming in over kind of attack vectors, as they're called, but they're coming in in areas where it's a web service that's been opened for some reason back in the way distance, hasn't been closed down, and they're using credentials on that because, you know, system to system. Typically in the old days, you used to have a password, a username and password that you set up for that, and it never changed, and kind of that was the way of doing it. The whole security thing, but it can be devastating. If you don't know what your debt is. You know, you rely on your Business Central, your NAV system for who owes you money. Suddenly, tomorrow, you don't have that list. You can't go chase anybody. Your cash flow stops pretty damn fast. And you better have deep pockets, because by the time you get all of that back and get in a situation where you can chase your customers again, you know, that can be a considerable period of time. Your backup mechanism, you know, so the classic back in kind of college days for me was a kind of grandfather, father, son. So
did they have computers then?
Yeah, well, with punch cards, mate. Okay, so we take punch cards home in the evening. Thanks. But you know, so if you've got 5 or 6 tapes or whatever you back up to, hard drives seem a popular option these days, and you rotate those around, well, by the time you know that you've been infected, it's probably infected on all of those as well. So, you know, you've got to take one out in the cycle and have one from 3 months ago or 6 months ago. And how far back do you go? Because they're
and how useful is that data?
And it's like, and what's changed, since then? And it's horrific. So,
and that's just the one threat of security, isn't it? Right? You also have high availability. If you're running on an on-premise solution now, have you got a duplicate of absolutely everything within your premise, in your building to keep that up? So it's not just the security, it's the actual hardware failure.
And the amount of time that it would take to get new hardware, get it back up and running. So it could be, if it was a fire.
And do those services run on modern hardware, or do you need to go and find older hardware that it only runs on?
Yeah. I mean, virtualization has removed some of that, but you still need the hardware to run it on, don't you? So those are a couple of the threats we're talking about. So you've got backups, just even if your data screws up, right? You've got the threat of a ransomware attack or a security breach, and then you've got your hardware that you're reliant on or something to run it on.
Stop breaks.
Okay.
If it just stops, how resilient are you to get back up and running quickly?
So what does the SaaS platform offer in high level to overcome some of these?
Well, I think we should probably cover it by saying that no service is ever going to be 100% fail-proof, fail-proof and immune from malicious intent. You know, they're like James said, they're clever. And if they want to get in, they probably will. So
I'm gonna say, you know, I think that the major people like Amazon, Oracle, Microsoft as the big kind of what we call hyperscalers. So, you know, the people who have data centers in a lot of different places around the world, they get attacked. Boy, they get attacked. But the point is that they put the investment and the teams of people in and the policies. You know, I seem to spend my life logging into a different system. I go into a different tab in the browser and I try and log in and it goes, authenticate, and I have to, you know, do it, and then I have to do the 2-factor, so authenticator on my phone and get the code and type it into it. It's like half my day seems to be security. But the opposite is,
there's a reason.
And you know, they're putting all of these barriers in place, and they might seem like they slow you down, but they're doing it for a reason, because they're looking at it and they're going, the risk here is great.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? They're constantly getting attacked, but they've got a team of experts that no individual organisation could even hope to replicate.
Yeah, they're at the forefront of security, aren't they? They're writing the products that sit there, which are then trying to be attacked.
Why she might be relying on a small IT team of 2 or 3 who might be very skilled and very, very good at what they do, they cannot possibly have the breadth of skills that the team
or the ability to respond 24/7 around the world, wherever it happens.
I mean, you know, I think as well, working with the Microsoft teams, talking to some of the people who develop some of their products, Business Central specifically, security trumps everything. So if there is a security vulnerability, the product team don't get a choice. They have to follow the guidelines of the security. Now, 20 years ago, Microsoft deservedly had a poor reputation for not having a secure platform or whatever. They, by and large, I think that they've changed that over that period. So in the last, 5 years, you saw Cloudflare and a few of the bolt-on people who've had attacks and took down, multiple airlines around the world and all the rest of it. But Microsoft themselves, their core system, I won't say they haven't had a breach, but they've been few and far between, because the culture there is now security first. Well, and everything has to be assessed in terms of security.
We had Kenny, didn't we, on the podcast, and he was talking about that a few episodes back. So Kenny was from the Microsoft product team. He was talking about security is at the heart of
everything that they do.
And it's why it takes sometimes longer to get stuff out.
And why sometimes they produce the software and you go, couldn't you just made that a whole bunch easier? But they're not, because they don't want to make it a whole bunch easier for the hackers in whichever country. And you look at the geopolitical situation with the way the world's fragmenting right now, and you think, it's fair game for one group of people to have a go at anybody in these countries from this country is fair game.
Yeah, well, we know nations attack. Nations use it as a form of warfare.
Yeah, so it is hugely disruptive as well. You saw the power outages in Spain and Portugal recently, which pretty devastating. And being on SaaS, the SaaS data center kept going. So, it's fundamentally, you couldn't connect to it because there was no internet access, but at least when it came back, you could connect.
A few days ago, even in Wolverhampton, the metropolis that it is, had a power outage for about 15 minutes, right? The grid went down. And we were still able to access BC on your phone, or you could tether your laptop to your phone in the office, even though we'd lost everything else. If we'd been on-prem, as we used to be, that would have been done. And the time to come back up, and the damage just having a server go, even with the UPS for a few minutes, not taking out of control.
But it happened 2 or 3 times, didn't it?
When it was coming back up,
it was going off, coming back on, going off, coming back on. It was.
So apparently, the mobile networks, there's a standard for mobile networks because in the UK, the mobile networks now are used for emergency services radio. So they have a standard apparently that
so they have to keep going.
They have effectively resilient systems at each individual mast that will keep them going for a period of time they do not disclose.
So these really clever hackers, do you think they could come and reset the clock on my cooker? That's now reset to try, it's now saying 1440.
That's beyond them.
Put it in a kind of there's got to be an idea site somewhere.
It's like the cooker clock.
And if you have to, getting them to say the same time, because it drives me OCD nuts.
As long as you send them a Bitcoin, then they'll come and do it for you. Yeah.
That's what I should do to stop people have a cooker clock to set before you can get in anything.
Well, that's the only funny thing is talking to one client who did actually pay the ransom because they didn't really have a choice. They said the customer service was phenomenal in terms of restoring all their systems, and they were getting calls to say, are you okay? And anything else you need back as a priority, and all the rest of it.
It's like organised like a business.
Yeah, but
and then what have you got? Do you trust them that's okay now? Now you've paid the ransom.
But they want you to. Now. The point was made, Matt, that they want you to trust them, and they want the customer service, the reputation of the customer service to be great. Because
the next person
goes, I'll pay the ransom.
Which is the recommendation by a lot of the
police.
Depending on a certain level.
Pay it.
Yeah.
How long before they're charging protection money? But
that's what I mean.
How do they protect you from?
You're better off just not to get in that situation in the first place, aren't you?
So what SaaS does, SaaS, there is a whole bunch of stuff. And if you go to, there's a Microsoft website called servicetrust.microsoft.com. And if you look at all the standards, ISO, IEC, SOC, a whole bunch of stuff around GDPR on there, FedRAMP, PCI, CSA Star, Australian IRAP, Singapore MTCS. So one of the beauties, I think, of the hyperscalers that do it in multiple countries is they have to build systems that are compliant with every regulator in every geography, and so therefore they get the kind of Singapore needs this, Spain needs this, and I'm just reading from the list of countries that all have their individual recommendations and kind of policies about what should and shouldn't happen, and you've seen Microsoft do a lot of work around the data not going outside the region because in Germany, that's a federal requirement that it can't go.
Well, that's quite a common objection, isn't it? When on the few customers that we've got that choose not to go down the SaaS route, one of the objectives is I want to know where my data is. My data has to be in the UK, or my data has to be wherever it should be. So in terms of where your data sits, if you spin up a UK tenant, your data will sit
in the UK
by default in the UK. Now in the UK there are multiple data centres.
There's UK South and there's UK West. UK West is actually 2 data centres, one of which is in Wales, one of which is in County Durham.
Which isn't in the West. But anyway,
it's in the North.
Let's ignore the fact that the geography isn't. So if there was a failover, then it should go to one of the other data centres.
So every business central has 2 databases. They have the primary database, which will be in one of the UK South or UK West in terms of the UK, and they have a secondary one, a replica, which is maybe milliseconds behind, but not more than 1 or 2 transactions behind, which is in the secondary data center. Now, you can actually use that replica. You can put things, from a performance point of view, you should point queries and so on against the replica. Yeah. But what it means is, in effect, if the replica is in a different data center, if one of them goes down, there's a failover, and in effect, you shouldn't notice. So an aeroplane, the mythical aeroplane we always talk about, could land on one of the data centers, wipe it out completely, and the other data center should carry on perfectly happily. Yeah. The other thing that they do is kind of the backup process for Microsoft is not, it's not a point in time each day where they go, oh, it's 10 o'clock in the evening, let's do the backups, chaps. It's kind of continuous, so you can restore any 5-minute point in time. I think it's for 30 days.
Yeah, I think it extends out a little bit as you get further away from the current time zone. So it's 5 minutes.
So in effect, you could, and that's held, and then you can go and take a snapshot of those backups, and you can load them into your own storage, and you can do that 10 times a month as part of your security. Now, there's the question about what you'd restore that to. But can we talk about the other elephant in the room, which has come up recently, which is, America has a new president. And he's made some pronouncements this day that haven't been, that have rocked confidence. And so you've started to have a question of, Microsoft is an American company. What happens if they get ordered by the US government to shut down XYZ country in a particular part of Europe? So what's been published in the last few weeks is that Microsoft have taken this threat, I guess, seriously, the question seriously, perhaps more than a threat, and said, they have a huge business in Europe, for instance, and some of the countries that have been where confidence has been rocked, have asked this question. They've come through from the senior people. So there's the guy who heads this up for Microsoft, who sits on the Microsoft board. And they've come through and assured that they would not close down any entity in certainly the European, including the UK. It's Europe as in the continent, not Europe as in the EU. And that they will place copies of source code in a secure facility, that they're talking about being, Austria was the one I heard mentioned. And in effect, they will protect and they will appoint various people in the European part of Microsoft. So in effect, if Mr. Trump has a bit of a hissy fit again and orders shutdown of something in Europe, then effectively the Europeans could take over and run it themselves, and Microsoft, he's indicating, would refuse to comply with that ruling from the US government, and the US government would struggle to enforce that. It seems a mad world to me where you've got to kind of have these policies and all this in place. But again, there's another blog from Microsoft that we'll publish on the bottom, and it goes into quite some detail, and I was impressed in terms of what their doing, but they're making the Microsoft kind of ecosystem resilient in Europe from any hard dependency on the US.
But you get the same with Amazon.
I think they're all going to have to, because
Global.
trust between countries globally has been rocked. Yeah. It's fair to say in the last 3 months. But you're still, on SaaS. So there's two reasons for SaaS. One is the security is way tighter. You should, if you are not doing two-factor authentication and using passkeys and all of the other things, if you haven't got a password manager in your organization, guys, go get one, because you're crazy not to have that. Because the way Microsoft SaaS will be hacked is one of your users' credentials and maybe their phone will get used, and so they'll come in thinking it's a valid user and it's not.
I mean, we've talked a lot about the security, the backup. You've also got the benefit of the scale. You don't need to go and order another bunch of servers when it starts creaking or something goes.
Performance.
Yes, absolutely. So, storage they do charge you for,
plus the functionality as well. There's things now available in the SaaS environment that are not available.
Yeah, AI being the
main thing. So there are lots. I mean, we focus a lot on security because that's kind of a hot topic at the moment, and I think the customers that still are saying that they can't or won't go to SaaS should potentially reconsider that, but and look at all the information.
Well, and the true cost of staying on-prem, because I had one customer who said, it's all behind the firewall, and that we worked out the firewalls were 5 years old. And it's kind of, well, you might as well have a chocolate fire guard in place then. So are you spending the money? Is somebody going? Dear Mr. Finance Director out there, somebody's going to walk into your office and say, we're vulnerable without this. And what are you going to say when that's? You're going to say, oh no, we're not spending that money. Well, because you have zero choice, don't you, in that situation about whether you do it or not. You might as well leave your front door unlocked.
I was just about to say it's the equivalent now of no one's going to come and no one's going to come and rob your telly anymore. It's not worth anything. It's pointless, isn't it? But your data is to you worth whatever that they think they can ransom you for.
On SaaS, Microsoft encrypt your data within the database. They use their own encryption keys, and you
can use your own if you want to.
You can log in and use your own encryption keys if you're mad about that.
I think it's safe to say our recommendations.
The other silly thing you get as well is you get sometimes people that don't see the benefit of SaaS or don't trust it. You just say, but are you using Microsoft 365? Oh, yes, we've got, that's great. So where's all your data then? Although, the penny drops, they go, yeah, okay.
I think, the other thing is kind of the single sign-on piece. So you have an employee who becomes disgruntled. That's a very vulnerable thing to have.
Yeah.
Because if they want to cause you some bother, they go and give their credentials. So, going on and disabling that one person in one place, and it locks them out of all your mail, data storage, and Business Central and everything else. Setting up the security groups, on Enter ID, so that in effect that runs across multiple applications as well. Make life easy for yourself, people. It's kind of because
SaaS does make life easier, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
I mean, we do get asked, and it's true. They still have outages on the SaaS platform.
But
what we're saying, most of those SaaS outages are all to do normally with DNS, isn't it? Where something's not quite right. It's not a security breach. It's that somewhere normally we're logging on or something along those lines. That you can't get any. If you're in the system, it's carried on working. And Microsoft are one of the only companies that do put a service credit on the SLA. So if you are outside the terms of the SLA, they will monetarily refund you in terms of what they'll do. So
you're not going to get rich, but
you're not get rich, but
they'll give you the money.
Yeah, and
but it shows their confidence to be able to do it.
That it's not going to be down for days on end.
It does show that they have confidence in what they're doing, and that's the problem, isn't it? If you're on premise and you have an issue, so whether it's malicious or whether it's natural disaster, then it can be days and days to be back up and running. That doesn't happen on SaaS. You might be off for half an hour, but certainly not days and days.
Tecman's history is funny, isn't it? Because we've had fires that have wiped people out. We've had floods that have wiped people out. It's kind of like,
But that's
we haven't had an insect kind of swarm yet that I can think about. But I'm trying to think of what kind of plague. But it's over the years, you think this doesn't happen, but sooner or later it does. And for the organisations, it's devastating.
We started by this, and the ransomware attacks, when that happens, it's a bit like you never think you can get burgled, and people put a burglar alarm in the day after they've been burgled. The ransomware ones are horrific because you cannot get your data, and like you say, it just spreads the encryption of what they've put in, just spreads through all your backup, your higher availability servers, and it just goes. So it's
and the point around it is that I think everybody agrees that customers have less patience these days than they had 10, 20 years ago.
Once you find a new supplier, you don't always go back, do you?
No. So it creates a vulnerability.
If you've got a culture where you've got half your workforce working from home, it's not like when everybody's in the office and you could go back to kind of manual processes because everybody was there.
Pass a piece of paper around.
If you've got, then actually you've got half a workforce that can't work at all.
I've heard so many of our customers saying if they weren't on SaaS, COVID would have taken their business down. Because they wouldn't have been able to access the system.
Yeah.
Well, even with our support services on Monday.
PaaS and SaaS as well, because some people might think, right, well, it's okay because I'm on Azure anyway because on PaaS.
Yeah.
So have on private cloud rather than on SaaS. So whilst they will have some of the security benefits, it's certainly not. They are just as vulnerable in some ways as on-premise, aren't they? Because they have to manage that themselves.
You have to manage. You're basically just buying some resource from Microsoft, and you then have to manage it and back it up.
So all the things that we've talked about,
you open
if you're
things,
on
close
PaaS,
things.
Whilst you've got some of the benefits, you certainly don't have all of the things that we've talked about on SaaS. Okay, just to make that point. So some people might think I've already made the move to PaaS. I'm already on Azure. I'm fine. That there is a responsibility to manage that.
You were talking about him impacting your business and what we provide. On Monday, even though we went down for 15, 20 minutes in the office, half the support team worked from home because we've kept that going after COVID. They could keep taking calls. Teams were still working for everybody else.
Only if you live just outside Wolverhampton.
So you need a geographically
spread.
That was in our benefit, absolutely.
But they could carry on taking calls. They could carry on logging calls. It was not a problem for our service. If we'd have all been based here 6-7 years ago, we couldn't have taken a phone call.
So if our systems were running on premise, just the startup time of
getting
servers getting all back up, and normally something goes
in
wrong.
the right order.
Yeah, because they've shut down.
And then of course what happens, if your IT manager's on holiday, the other guy doesn't start till 9. It's 8:00 in the morning.
You can't. Systems are so mission critical.
Exactly.
They have to.
Exactly.
We have to do everything we possibly can to do work, and I think if you look at the whole cost of having a secure system on premise, then actually SaaS. It's pretty cheap.
Yeah, it is.
I'm afraid there is. Microsoft, say they charge there is a premium for providing all of this stuff on SaaS. It's not free, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper than doing it yourself, and you don't have the capital expenditure every 4 years and all the rest of it of rebuying the equipment because it constantly moves up.
Server licensing and people to run it in air conditioning and heating
and then 2 years time there's another vulnerability and you have to change it all because this is the thing. 5 years ago was ransomware a thing? I'd heard of it, but I hadn't really seen it. Now I've definitely seen it in the last few months.
I remember one of our customers having their server with a post-it note saying that the login name was admin with no password. And that was on their server.
Stuck on the front.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thank God we've moved on from that days. But, it's just, I think it's like running a business with zero insurance to not secure your systems. I can't comprehend how anybody can take that choice. The opposite side of that Liz moved on and we should move on though is actually I'm just back from a conference out in Thailand. I was there last week with Microsoft, and some of the stuff that they were showing around AI and agents, I think is going to be fundamental to most Business Central users. And it connects to a whole bunch of other, that's Business Central connecting to a whole bunch of other services on Azure and exploiting those services. And you can't do that if you're on-premise. There is zero chance of you being able to do that. This is just transforms the way a lot of processes are going to work in your organization. I went on record, said, in 30 years, I've not seen anything this significant to the users. And the analogy I used multiple times, so people might have heard it before, forgive me, but if you were putting a sales order on a system back in the mid-90s, you needed the customer account number, you needed the item number, you needed a quantity and a price, and you fill those in and the sales order's on. If you probably went up to Business Central now, it looks very different, but you could figure out how to put a sales order on. I think with agents doing it, this is the first time where you're not actually going to be putting it in. It's going to be doing it for you, and you're going to be supervising it. So this is the first thing that's really changed what the user does in a fundamental way. And it's going to, it's come. So,
and this isn't just a BC thing or a Microsoft thing.
No,
agents are going to be everywhere.
Everywhere. So it's going to, I think there's a whole bunch of implications for society around the number of people you're going to need. I was talking around that with a client yesterday, and how do we bring this in without spooking all the people who, might not be needed in 3 months. So there's a whole topic of conversation to talk to there. But the change is coming, and if you try and resist it, well, that's the way of dinosaurs, and you know what happened to them. So I think, getting ready for this, because one of the slides that Microsoft showed in Thailand was really the speed of adoption of things like mobile phones. So when mobile phones came in, I think it took 12 years or something for 50% of the population to have one. And, you looked at other revolutions that were through and the bar graph went out, usually years. ChatGPT came along, and kind of, a whole section of society had tried it out within 4 months of it being launched. And so the speed of the AI revolution, and there's a lot of hype, but boy, there's some substance coming through the hype, which is what we've seen in previous revolutions. Mobile phones being a class in point, lots of hype around those. But how many people leave the house without one now?
Yeah, there was a big cost of entry to that, wasn't there, at the time?
Yeah.
This is not, I don't think there's not that big cost for businesses. I know they're monetising it now, and maybe it's the next podcast topic we talk about. But you do need SaaS, bringing back SaaS. But you're absolutely right, the change, and you cannot take advantage of these AI functionality within Dynamics without being on the SaaS platform.
And kind of, yes, there will be monetization, but when I look at it as somebody making business decisions myself, it's just not a question, because you look at the cost of employing people and the cost of running the AI process. That takes 10 minutes. That takes like 20 seconds. That one costs the manual process of a human doing it. So I think the guy who runs Salesforce came out and said this is the last generation that's going to manage purely humans. And actually, in the future, a lot of the management is going to be managing agents, managing process. And actually, if you think about it, a lot of businesses have what you've been using humans to do is to try and drive a particular process. And maybe you've had some tools, some machines in that process and so on. This is going to move the dial from how much is human-led and how much is machine agent-led significantly across to the agents.
Okay.
So get ready for this, because when you see it, again, yesterday I was showing a preview of an agent to a client, and they were like, "Wow, that's going to make," and it's not. They didn't think they could use it tomorrow. They didn't think it was ready for use, but they got the concept, and they went, in 2 years' time, when we can do what we do with the rest of Business Central, which is tune it to your specific organisation's requirements and needs and wants, potentially all of those where you have a big team of people sitting there doing basically question answering and data entry, those people are going to need to learn new skills is the tough message I would say. And I think it's how fast we can turn this technology around and make it business viable, because let's get past the hype, let's get past the fact that loads of marketing teams are, sorry Liam, using, putting AI in the end of a sentence because it gets them interest that the normal typer wouldn't.
Generating all the marketing with AI.
So I think the technology is
agents
very
are
close to being
agents
ready
are a big
to use.
difference. So let's do a topic on that. I think we've got a good podcast around SaaS. Let's get another one about agents. We're seeing it now become real. I think in what's happening with BC and CRM, it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Yes.
Okay. Well, if you've got any questions, I think if you're one of our Tecman customers and you're listening to this and you're still on-prem, speak to your customer engagement manager and see what your options are and how we can help that journey. If you're not a Tecman customer, why not?
Reach out. I'll have a discussion with you at a level, and I can go through and we can walk you through all of the different policies and kind of compliance that Microsoft have on the SaaS platform.
But for lots of different industries.
Don't just say, I can't go, I'm a supplier to the MOD, so I can't go on SaaS or I'm a supplier to the NHS. Actually, bluntly, I would state you're probably more likely to pass a compliance audit if you're on SaaS than if you're on premise. So things are changing, and they're changing quite quickly. And don't take folklore. Come and talk to us about what the state of play is now today.
Okay. All right. Perfect. All right. Well, thanks, Liz, James, Matt. It's always good to have a good discussion around what's going on in the world. And thank you for listening to this episode of Tecman Talks Dynamics. We'll see you soon.